Today is really part two of a story that we began last week. Since context is so important for understanding Jesus' parables, let me catch you up real fast. So this whole episode began back in Matthew 17 when Jesus told his disciples he's going to die by crucifixion. Okay? Then in Matthew 18, verse 1, his disciples responded to that question, to that statement with a question. They said, "Hey Jesus, which of us is going to be the greatest in your kingdom? Who's number one?" Now, Jesus wasn't very happy at all with that question. And so, the entire rest of chapter 17 and 18 is Jesus' eye-opening response to his disciples' question. Therefore, this whole chapter is Jesus putting self-righteousness on blast, okay? And him revealing the true, merciful, and gracious nature of his kingdom. But, you see, I said all that because the passages we're about to read today have almost always been ripped out of that context and presented individually on their own, and therefore they have been badly misused and misinterpreted by the church over the centuries. Okay? So today, we're just going to leave these stories in their original context. Does that sound good? Just going to leave them there where they should be, and then I think that way we'll be able to see what Jesus is actually teaching us. All right? And so today's text begins, this is important for you to know, it begins immediately after Jesus tells the parable of the lost sheep. Okay? So Jesus is not changing the subject here. This is just one continuous teaching he's going through here. So let's check it out, shall we? Today we come to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 18, and we will read verses 15 through 35. Matthew 18, 15 through 35. If you don't have a Bible with you, it is okay. The verses are on the screen behind me. Remember, this happens right after the parable of the lost sheep. Verse 15. If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen, even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Truly, I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, truly, I tell you, that if 2 of you on earth agree about anything they ask for, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 gather in my name, there am I with them. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, "Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times?" Jesus answered, "I tell you, not 7 times, but 77 times. Therefore, the kingdom of heaven is like a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. As he began the settlement, a man who owed him 10,000 bags of gold was brought to him. Since he was not able to pay, the master ordered that he and his wife and his children and all that he had be sold to repay the debt. At this, the servant fell on his knees before him. 'Be patient with me,' he begged, 'and I will pay back everything.' The servant's master took pity on him, canceled the debt, and let him go. But when that servant went out, he found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 silver coins. He grabbed him and began to choke him. 'Pay back what you owe me,' he demanded. His fellow servant fell to his knees and begged him, 'Be patient with me, and I will pay it back.' But he refused. Instead, he went off and had the man thrown into prison until he could pay the debt. When the other servants saw what had happened, they were outraged and went and told their master everything that had happened. Then the master called the servant in. "You wicked servant," he said. "I canceled all that debt of yours because you begged me to. Shouldn't you have had mercy on your fellow servant just as I had on you?" In anger, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he should pay back all he owed. This is how my heavenly Father will treat each of you unless you forgive your brother or sister from your heart. This is God's word. All right, so Jesus introduces the parable of the unforgiving servant with a teaching. We started off with it. That seems to say that sinners only get 3 strikes and then they're out. That's the way it's typically been taught. Over the centuries, sinners, you get 3 strikes, you're out, right? And so it's precisely based on this text and a couple other apparently hard-nosed passages that the church worked up its 2,000-year love affair with excommunication. Well, we'll give you 3 strikes, but that's it. After 3 strikes, you're out of here. But let's be real. Usually, it's just 1 strike, and you're out. It's typically the way it goes. So this teaching from Jesus has given church folks gleeful enthusiasm for running strays off the Good Shepherd's ranch. But is that the right way to interpret this teaching? Heavens no, it's not. That interpretation completely ignores the immediately preceding parable of the lost sheep. And it completely ignores the immediately following parable of the unforgiving servant. In both of those parables, astonishing levels of grace and forgiveness are doled out unconditionally. And sandwiched in between those two is this teaching of 3 strikes and you're out. So it actually doesn't make any sense unless Jesus is double-minded. Unless he just immediately likes contradicting himself, right? So is that what Jesus is doing? Is he just contradicting himself? Is he just not very smart? Did he just lose track of his thought process here? Just mental train went off the tracks? No. I don't think so. I actually think a closer reading of this teaching reveals remarkable grace from Jesus. Because let's just think about it here together. So from Mark's and Luke's Gospels, they have this same teaching, all right? And so from their Gospels, we know that Jesus is talking about a person who sins against you. Okay, so this is not just some random sinner you run across. Okay, this is someone who sins against you personally. Okay, now, so how should you respond to a person who sins against you personally? Get on Facebook? Tell the community how you were victimized? No. Jesus says go privately to them and tell them about the offense. Don't embarrass them, okay? Just you and them, privately. And if they blow you off, then you can go to Facebook? No, still don't go to Facebook. If they blow you off, take a couple of people. Next time, take a couple of other people who love wayward sheep. Take them with you, and then talk to the person again. And if they blow all 3 of y'all off, go to Facebook. Nope. Still no Facebook, sadly enough. At that point, Jesus wants you to go to the church with the issue. Now, every commentary I have on this says that Jesus doesn't mean literally go to every person in the church or stand up in front of everyone on Sunday morning and put that sinner on blast. That is not what Jesus is talking about. No, he's talking about the church representatives here. Okay, so by the church, he's talking about the elders or the pastor. Okay? And so, let's think about what is the job of a pastor and an elder? Their literal job description is to be a shepherd. That's the job. In fact, that's what the word means. Are you starting to connect the dots here between the parable of the lost sheep and this teaching? So Jesus is like, hey, if they blow you off 3 times, take them to the shepherd, or the shepherds, the elders, so that they can gently restore this wandered sheep, the sheep who's wandered off. See? It's actually remarkably gracious teaching. It's not 3 strikes and you're out. Okay? Now, if you actually follow steps 1 and 2, you almost never even get to step number 3. The elders will never even know that this happened. Okay? But sadly, virtually no one follows the first 2 steps. No one. They go straight to the pastor, or straight to Facebook, or straight to their friends to gossip about how that person hurt them. But Jesus here is showing us how to gently restore a sheep who's wandered off. See? Again, context is king. Right? Jesus, in the parable of the lost sheep, has just finished talking about actively rescuing sinners, not giving them the boot. See? So what is Jesus describing here then? How to actively rescue sinners. See? He's saying, go get them and bring them home. Do for them what the Good Shepherd did for you. See? Now, one big clue here that Jesus is teaching grace is verse 17. Put verse 17 up for me. Jesus says, if they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen, even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Right? So Jesus says, treat these persistent sinners like pagans and tax collectors. Some of your translations say, treat them like Gentiles and tax collectors. Okay? Now, would someone like to tell me how Jesus treated Gentiles, pagans, and tax collectors? See, the church has typically interpreted verse 17 as, aha! We can give them the boot. Just get these sinners out of here. Can't be letting all the riffraff into the Good Shepherd's ranch. Let's get them out of here. But tell me, how did Jesus treat pagans? How did Jesus treat tax collectors? Again, it was illustrated perfectly in the previous parable about the lost sheep. That's how he treated tax collectors. Put that picture up for me. We put this up last week. Put the picture up. This is what Jesus did for pagans and tax collectors. Right? In fact, one such tax collector is writing this very gospel that we're reading from today. He wrote the gospel we're reading. See, friends, treat them as Gentiles, pagans, and tax collectors. This is what that means. Because Jesus relentlessly pursued Gentiles, pagans, and tax collectors until he found them. And then he put them on his shoulders, rejoiced, and brought them home. He didn't give them the boot. He didn't say, you dirty lost sheep. No. He brought them home rejoicing. That means, friends, you don't excommunicate sinners and then wipe your hands of them. No. You relentlessly pursue them. Another clue that Jesus is teaching grace here is verse 21. Put verse 21 up. It's a pretty big clue here. Verse 21. Then Peter came to Jesus and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive? See that little word there? How many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Up to 7 times? You see, folks, when paired with the previous parable of the lost sheep, this teaching is scandalously gracious, and Peter knows it. Why do you think he asked this question immediately after the teaching? Right? He responds by saying, how many times am I supposed to do this? Right? Like, this can't go on forever. Right? I mean, let's be reasonable, Jesus. How many times do we let a sheep run off before we just quit going after it? Maybe like, I don't know, 7 times? 7 strikes and you're out? Now, I'm sure Peter thought the number 7 was big enough to please his gracious master. It wasn't. Because Jesus responds by saying, Peter, try 70 times 7. Some translations are going to say 77, but either way. It's another way of saying, do it however long it takes to bring that little sheep home. However long it takes. Okay, so that's the introduction to the parable. Jesus likes these long introductions, long prologues. But they're very important, okay? Because if you just isolate the parable by itself, it makes it much harder to figure out what he's talking about, okay? But if you leave it in its context, it becomes much easier, okay? So this whole thing is the context for the following, the parable we're about to read, right? So let's get to the parable itself. Jesus, being the very shrewd teacher that he is, he begins by setting up law, not grace, okay? So the king in this story, in this parable, is a bookkeeper, pure and simple. That's like all he is, just a bookkeeper, right? He just wants to know exactly how much you owe him and then collect the debt, whatever the number is, period, okay? And so when the servant comes with a debt of what would be, scholars say, about 10 million American dollars, that's the debt that he owes the king. The king doesn't hesitate at all. He immediately orders the man to be sold, lock, stock, barrel, wife, and children, and restitution to be made. There's no forgiveness in the story so far, and there is no reason to expect it. But then the servant falls on his knees and begs the king to give him a chance at repayment. Okay? And shockingly, the king's attitude completely changes. The king simply forgives the man and dismisses his debt entirely and sets him free. Now, notice the very important principle here. The king gives the servant forgiveness and freedom as pure gift. Okay? It's pure gift. It's not that the servant earns the king's forgiveness with his promise to repay everything. Okay? No. The king knows good and well this fella ain't never paying off this debt. It's way too large for him to ever repay it. That's why Jesus chose such a large number here for the parable. The debt is impossible to repay. So no, it wasn't the servant's promise to repay the debt that moved the king. No, it was the king's own compassion for the servant that triggered the forgiveness. Okay? Period. Nothing else. The servant did not earn it. This isn't a tit-for-tat transaction. The king knows he's not going to repay it. He can't. So out of the king's own compassion, he forgives him of the debt. Now, if you don't believe me, let's dive a little deeper into the story. The servant, as it turns out, is a bookkeeper too. He's a bookkeeper. He's making a list and checking it twice as to what everyone around him owes him. See? This is just how he views the world. Every relationship is transactional. Every relationship. And therefore, he no doubt thinks the king is exactly like him. In other words, he has not a shred of the notion of unconditional grace in his mind. Not one shred. Grace is a concept completely foreign to him. We know that because he doesn't ask for grace, does he? He doesn't ask for mercy. Nope. Instead, he puts forward this con job about repayment. You see, the servant knows he needs salvation, but the only Savior he can imagine is a king who would only go along with some kind of transaction, a repayment proposition. This is the exact same mentality of the prodigal son, isn't it? Who just couldn't fathom his father letting him come back home without repayment. Just couldn't fathom it. But, just like the father in the story of the prodigal, the king here responds to nothing that the servant has in mind. Nothing. The king completely ignores the nonsense about repayment. He doesn't say, well, just try your best, right? Just try your best, Just do the best you can. If you try really hard, raise a couple $1,000,000 and we'll call it square. No! He completely ignores what the servant asked him to do. And he says, no, forget all that. You're free. You're free. Just go, 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 go. You're free. Your debts are canceled. You're completely forgiven. The king makes no calculations at all about profit and loss. He just simply drops dead to the whole business of bookkeeping. The king suddenly and shockingly stops being a bookkeeper and forgives the servant outright. The king does, in short, what the servant couldn't even conceive of doing. The servant was so busy trying to hold together his own bookkeeping business that he never even noticed what the king had done for him. The king put a "gone out of business" sign on the front door of his bookkeeping operation. And the servant didn't even see it on his way out the door. Didn't see it. And he certainly hadn't the slightest notion of what it cost the king to forgive him. You see, well, wait a minute. What do you mean it cost the king? It didn't cost him anything. He just forgave it, right? Friends, that ain't how forgiveness works. You see, the servant's debt was legit. It was legitimate. He actually had rung up $10 million on the king's dime. Which means $10 million is missing from the king's bank account. Over the years, people have asked me, they say, why can't God just forgive us and move on, right? Like, why send Jesus to us at all? If you're online or on YouTube at all, you'll see all these YouTube atheists saying this nonsense all the time, right? It's like, why not just forgive us? Like, why all this ridiculous crucifixion and death and stuff by Jesus? Why can't he just forgive us? Why send Jesus at all? And friends, that's exactly the kind of question this servant would ask. See? Because he has no concept of what forgiveness costs. No concept. Because he's never forgiven anyone in his whole life. So he has no idea what it costs to forgive. You see, friends, in order to release the servant of the debt, the king himself has to pay it. He has to eat the $10 million hole in his bank account. He just eats it. That's just how debt forgiveness works, folks. Right? Somebody has to pay for it. Either the borrower or the lender. But somebody has to pay. Now, before we get too mad at the servant for all this, and for how harsh he is with the guy, he chokes the guy who owed him a very small debt. Before we get too mad at him, the truth is that he is, in fact, exactly what everyone in the world is. He's a bookkeeper. He's a bookkeeper. Just like me. And just like you. You and I are professional bookkeepers. We keep the books like nobody's business. And just like him, you and I cannot even conceive of a God who's not a bookkeeper too. This is why the gospel is so offensive and shocking. It just can't be right. God is just like me. He can't die to the business of bookkeeping because bookkeeping is what life is all about. I know I've always got my list, and I'm always checking it twice. Let's see. Let's see here. My husband forgot our anniversary, so I'll make him pay for that forever. And that girl at work got the promotion over me, so I'll make sure I'm really bitter towards her and talk a lot of crap about her at work. Yes, and my best friend has not been calling me much lately. What's her deal? I don't know. I guess I'll make her feel super guilty about that. I'll make a couple of snide comments about that. Let's see. You know what? I helped my neighbor with her garden last week, and she never said thanks or nothing. Last time I'll do that. You see? Our whole lives are spent calculating how much everyone around us owes us. And so we calculate two things. Number one, how much other people have hurt us and how we're going to extract payment from them. Number two, how much we've contributed to others and how we're going to extract repayment from them. See? We would never dream of going out of the bookkeeping business. It's too fun. And therefore, we would never dream of God doing it either. But folks, that actually is the point of this entire chapter. Not just this parable, the whole thing. The point is that God has closed down his bookkeeping business forever. Remember, the chapter begins with Jesus' own bookkeeping disciples asking him, who's the greatest among them? And of course, they think Jesus is just like them. So what do they expect him to do? Check the books. Exactly. They expect him to check the books. They're like, Jesus, check the books. See which one of us. We've been in a little argument here. Check the books. See which one of us is contributing the most to your kingdom. See which one of us is doing the best. And the primary point of Jesus' long response to his disciples is this. He's saying, brothers, I'm not like you at all. At all. My kingdom doesn't run on bookkeeping. It runs on grace. In fact, the only way you miss out on my kingdom is when you, just like this servant, insist on bookkeeping. That's the only way you can miss it. If you insist on earning your way in and earning your way up, things are going to turn out horribly for you. Because to chase after your own righteousness, that's really what bookkeeping is, isn't it? To chase after your own righteousness is to reject mine. And my righteousness is your only ticket in. In my kingdom, there are only forgiven sinners and no one else. There are no good guys, no upright, successful types who by the grit of their own self-efforts have been accepted into the great country club in the sky. No. There are only failures. In my kingdom, only those who have accepted their deaths in their sins and are crucified with me will be resurrected with me. You see, folks, the king in this parable actually gave the servant two astonishing gifts, not one. Number one, he forgave his debts. But number two, he freed him from ever having to bookkeep again. He freed him from the bookkeeping business. Because that's what canceling your debts does. You don't have to bookkeep anymore. That's over. And the servant was perfectly happy with gift number one. But he outright rejected gift number two. Because he loved his bookkeeping too much to either notice or care what it cost the king to do this for him. And so now the question turns to you this morning, my friend. Do you see what it cost your king to forgive you and set you free? It was his blood, his very own life, that paid the debt that you owe. Down to the very last penny. Hebrews 9:22 says, without the shedding of blood, there is no forgiveness of sins. But his blood was shed, and therefore there is forgiveness of your sins. So, you friends, and me included, we can burn the books. Burn the books. And that, friend, that actually is what heaven is. It's a book burning party. We gather up all the books and we burn them and dance around the fire. That's what Jesus' kingdom is, don't you see? It's unlimited, unconditional, unending forgiveness and freedom paid for by the King himself. He paid it. Heaven is where we redeemed sinners gladly hit our knees before the throne, throw our free hands in the air, and sing that joyful chorus, "Worthy is the Lamb who paid all my debts." That's heaven, but what about hell? In hell, the payment of the king is rejected. And the old life of bookkeeping is insisted on and becomes forever the pointless torture it always was.